Now I'm going to show you how I flavor my kombucha. There's many different ways that you can flavor your kombucha. I have tried a million ways to flavor my kombucha, and I always come back to my favorite combination of ingredients. It's my go-to. I don't change my recipe very often anymore because I've tried so many different kinds and I always end up coming back to this same one. So I pretty much stick to the same thing now. But let me show you a couple of different things that you can use to flavor kombucha. If you have on hand any kind of herbal teas, flavored herbal teas with fruit inside, those are perfect for flavoring kombucha. This one that I have here has big pieces of oranges inside, so it makes a nice flavored kombucha as well. So these are good alternatives. There are so many different recipes you can do. The combinations are endless. You can do hibiscus flowers, you can do fruits, you can do all kinds of different flavorings for kombucha. My suggestion for you to figure out what you like to flavor your kombucha is to do like I did, try different fruits, try different teas, try different combinations. You can add ginger, you can add, so it's really just to find your personal preference and what you like. So my favorite combination is a mixture of frozen raspberries that I freeze in the summer, freshly squeezed lemons, and vanilla. So this is my favorite combination for kombucha. It's what I go to every time. It gets me the perfect flavors that I'm looking for, the carbonation that I'm looking for. So this is what I go to. So like I say, I could give you a million different recipes, but until you find the one that you like. I've made a strawberry rhubarb before, anyway. So you really gotta play around with this part to find your favorite flavors. Now I'd be missing my mark if I didn't talk to you first as well about jars. First of all, you need to have a glass jar, and you need to have a glass jar that is that can withhold carbonation. So you don't want a thin glass because it risks breaking. Like I don't want to dramatize it, but like exploding from the pressure of your carbonated kombucha. So you really need a carbonation grade jar, bottle, whatever you prefer. You can get like flip tops like these. You can get flip tops like this. Oh, it's upside down. This is one that I had gotten, actually an entire kit for making kombucha. And this is actually the bottle that I use to make my homemade vanilla. So there's flip tops like these. And this is actually a bottle that I had gotten kombucha with in the past, and I saved my bottle and the cap. And to be completely honest with you, this is my go-to every time. Unless for some reason I'm short on jars, I always use these. This is the only jar, in my opinion, that I find that I can get a really nice carbonated kombucha. I don't know if there's just too much air that comes out of these jars. I've tried adding like a piece of plastic wrap on top to try to seal it better, and I just can't get the carbonation that I'm looking for unless I use these jars. After a lot of experimentation and less than satisfying batches of kombucha, I always go back to this jar unless I'm short on this one, but that doesn't really happen because I've accumulated quite a collection of these now. So that is my personal opinion on jars. Alright, now let's get started in flavoring the kombucha. It's really simple. Once you've got your mixture of whatever you want to flavor it with, the steps are really simple. Now, like I said, I don't really follow a specific recipe on how much raspberry ratio per lemon juice, per vanilla. I just kind of go with a flavor that I really like. And I don't add any sugar to my raspberries. There's enough sugar in raspberries to create the carbonation that I'm looking for, so I don't add any more to the mixture. Sometimes when you're looking at recipes, they're suggesting to add sugars to, like if I was making a rhubarb, which is tart, maybe I would add a little bit more sugar in. So to grow the good bacteria, there needs to be some sugar, because that's what feeds the your SCOBY that's inside of your kombucha. So, but there's enough sugar in here, in your raspberries and in my lemon juice, to naturally create the sugar that I need to create the carbonation that I'm looking for. So basically what I do is I just add enough raspberries to my jars, to my bottles. I'm not canning, so it's not jars. I continue adding my fruit to my jars until I fill the bottom. Now, if you're using a smaller jar, you're going to want to make sure that you fill up a little bit more than just the bottom of your bottle. But for me, that's what I gauge on as to the quantity that I like, is to make sure that I have a nice coverage in the bottom. And for my lemon juice, I'm using the juice here of 1.5 lemons, freshly squeezed. And again, it's going to just depend on how large your lemons are. So I try to go evenly. So I'll start by adding 1 tablespoon of the lemon juice to each jar, just to make sure that they all get some. And if you want a more lemon flavored kombucha, you can add a lot more lemon juice if you'd like. So I just make sure I divide it equally between jars. And I do the same thing with the vanilla. I add somewhere around half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of vanilla per jar. Look at the vanilla beans at the bottom. This is my vanilla, so pretty. Once I've got all my flavorings inside of my bottles, I'm going to keep saying jars, it's time to add your kombucha. Now this is the kombucha that I've made in my previous batch and has been sitting for about 2 to 3 weeks. Like I said, I do not do this scientifically. I do not have temperature strips on my kombucha bottle. It wouldn't really matter whether I did or not, because I'm not going to turn the temperature up in my home to make sure this gets to the appropriate temperature, or put it in an oven. I don't even know how I would control my temperature of my kombucha anyway, so I don't bother with that. I think it would just get in my head too much. Like, is it at the right temperature? And there's nothing I can do. So I basically just let it ferment for 2 to 3 weeks. And basically, I've been successful doing it this way. Be sure to read up on all of this if you'd like. If you want a more scientific method of making your kombucha, make sure to read up on it. But I just keep it simple when I'm making my kombucha. As you can see all the lovely yeast floating around in the jar. And the SCOBY is sitting right up there on top. Now, lots of questions about, should the SCOBY be on top? What happens if my SCOBY sinks to the bottom? And it really makes no difference at all where your SCOBY is. Now you need to remember, when you're removing your SCOBY from inside of your container, you need to be sure, like I've always said, it's not recommended to use any kind of metal. You always want to use either a plastic or a wood, or so you're going to start by removing your SCOBY, and SCOBYs will look very different. Never looks the same. They seem to all be catching together and getting thicker. Oh, I can separate it. It's looking a little dark underneath, but that's fine as well. People worry about the color of their SCOBYs. Like, I seem to have a lot of them kind of stuck together here. And you can usually just kind of pull them apart. And you can add your extra SCOBYs to your SCOBY Hotel. I wouldn't add the dark one, because the dark one is probably getting darker because it's getting a little bit older, but it's still fine. And you can basically just pull them apart and add them to your SCOBY Hotel. Because every time you make a batch of kombucha, you're creating an additional SCOBY. You always reserve 2 cups of your first ferment, so your brew, before adding any flavoring. And I always want to give it a good stir, because you know the yeast is going to settle at the bottom. So you want to reserve 2 cups of this with your SCOBY to start your next batch. And there is some carbonation in this. If you look really close, there's some carbonation in here. I always give it a stir before I pour, and I pour it directly from the jar because I find that little spout is just too slow. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of carbonation already. I'm actually going to add that little piece of orange inside this jar that was in the tea that you saw. And fill my last jar. So that, my friends, is how I flavor my kombucha. Very simple. And after that, you just put the covers on the bottles that came with the bottles. Put them, close them nice and tight. And that's it. Now, I may do things a little bit different from some people. I leave the fruit inside of my jars. I don't strain the fruit out until I drink it. I find, like I tell you, I have tried so many different versions of making kombucha, and the way that I've finally finished on is what gives me the best product. So all I do when it comes time to drink, I just grab like you know what you can steep tea in. So I just put this inside my cup, pour my kombucha, and then just compost the fruit that's inside. So that's how I do it. That's how I find that I get the best carbonation with my kombucha. Otherwise, if I was straining it, I felt I was removing the sugars from the fruit, the yeast, and I wasn't getting the end product that I was looking for. Once you're done with your kombucha, don't throw this in the fridge right away. So now you want to store this in a dark environment. You can either wrap it in a cloth so it doesn't get exposed to light, or I just put mine underneath the cupboard and let it sit there. And here again, there's no right or wrong answer as to how long you let it sit. For me, my magic number for me is anywhere between 3 to 4 days, and that's where I get the carbonation I'm looking for. And you really want to keep an eye on this because you don't want your bottles to explode either if you leave them too long. I do not burp. Some makers of kombucha recommend that every day or so that you burp your bottle. So basically you loosen the cover to let some of the air out so there's not too much carbonation inside of your bottle. I find that I'm just releasing the carbonation that I actually want inside of my bottle when I do that. So I don't burp my bottles. I just sit and watch, and around 3 or 4 days I'll open one, and when they're warm they're gonna fizz a lot more. So like after 3 or 4 days, when I open my first bottle, it literally pours over, like it's so carbonated. But don't let that scare you. Then I put them in the fridge. When they're cooled down, they don't fizz and carbonate quite so much. So that is how I flavor my kombucha. I hope you've enjoyed this very simple way of flavoring your kombucha, sometimes known as what some people call the second ferment. The first ferment is when you've made your kombucha. Adding your fruit, your flavoring is called the second ferment because you're actually putting it through a second fermentation process. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy the content. If you do, give it a big thumbs up. Don't be shy. Hit that subscribe button and be sure to check back again soon to see what other content I'll have coming out.